America. My name is Alan Standish, and I'm the grandson of Walter Standish, who was gymnastic coach here between 1919 and 1939. Earliest memory is taking part in the gymnastic clubs in upstairs under the auspices of Walter Walsh, who was the next instructor after my grandfather. So yes, certainly being part of the gymnastic group and displays that took place in various parts of Swansea. Some of the stories we got are quite interesting, but the one that sticks in my mind most is the 1936 Olympics, which were held in Berlin. And grandfather was part of the British gymnastic squad of coaches who were looking after the British gymnastic team out there in Berlin. What was interesting was that the instructions for the routines in the gymnastics displays were only issued in German, so that all the other nations taking part in the Olympics had to find translators to understand what routines and in what order they were going to be performed in. And the reason it was only in German was that the idea, the concept of the master race meant that everyone else had to speak their language. But as a result of that, fortuitously, my father was able to speak German. He went out there with my grandfather, and they were able to get the routines sorted and perform quite adequately in the 36 Olympics. So I started gymnastics here because my father was associated with the YMCA, and then that thing came down onto me, and we as a family were then involved as youngsters having something to do, but at the same time my father was supporting the work that was going on in here with the likes of Walter Walsh as well. So it was a nice little handover, if you like. But to have someone carry the name through until about the early 60s, and then after that I sort of entered teenagerhood and moved on to other things. My time here spent at the YMCA was quite informative. I can certainly remember people of all ages offering advice and guidance in all sorts of ways to help not only young but the elderly who were here at the time as well. I can certainly remember, if you like, a smoking room, would you believe, in the early 60s, there was somewhere here on the building. Now, as a teenager, I was a young adult, I always found that quite interesting, having a smoking room. Why? But it is what it was at the time. And then I realized then there was actually a lot of people who were had survived World War II and were using the area as a form of de-stress or a way of dealing with their PTSD, their post-traumatic stress disorders. So the YMCA played a very crucial role in supporting those people who came through the doors in the way of encouraging them to get on with life in the way they can. It's nice to see that ethos carry through even as 100 years later, because I've no doubt that ethos was exactly the same in 1919 when you had people coming through the doors having survived the Great War, and there were activities here in the YMCA to do exactly what was done after World War II and even through to today. So it's all credit to you, all of you, continuing that ethos. I have the saddest memory of a very, very talented gymnast by the name of Bobby Jones in the early 60s, who was a friend of the family, but who was tragically killed coming back from a competition in Cardiff. He was tragically killed on the motorway coming back. And I can recall us receiving the phone call of informing us of what had happened to that wonderful gentleman, because he sort of nurtured us a little bit as being 8 or 9 years old. It was quite a sad occasion to realise that what was a good friend was going to be no more. And that's probably one of the saddest memories of the YMCA. What differences are there in between the building? Well, the last time I walked through those doors downstairs was 55 years ago, and there was a tremendous amount of emotion as I walked in this morning, as I get through that doorway and then approaching what was now the reception desk, because I don't think there was a reception desk in my young memory being there. And when I realized I was in the building was the flooring. Immediately it was the flooring that I remembered and jogged the memory as I walked through. But it was quite hard to go through. I had to take a deep breath to come and go, to get in. So it is what it is. In terms of the other buildings, well, I can certainly remember a cafeteria on the first floor. Perhaps I'm wrong in the idea of there were certainly billiards rooms or snooker rooms on the site. I certainly remember the gym being on the top floor, and I can remember there was a ladder strapped from the roof which went across the whole of the gym to a big wall clock, and that was there, and that was one of the standard routines of the expert gymnast, was to do a handstand, was to walk across the ladder by handstands and then stand on the wall clock, which was big, if you like, a big railway station clock, and then do a handstand and do activities on that, and then they walk back on their hands as well. And for us as youngsters looking at that, thinking, wow, what strength, what cleverness. But of course today it wouldn't be allowed. But my nightmare were the rings. Now the rings are obviously suspended down with 2 hoops, and the one thing that we could never do was we would watch the experts, and they do what they call a crucifix, which is your arms outstretched, and they support the body weight with your arms at 180 degrees and your body vertical. And as teenagers and youngsters, we desperately try and emulate what was being shown to us. And of course, every time you started, you just collapsed on the floor, much to the amusement of all the experts. The other thing I really hated was how to climb the rope, because you had to get to the top of the rope, and I couldn't get past the first 2 foot. But it taught a lot about discipline and self-discipline. The other side of it was performing at events. So the Brangwyn Hall was always a feature every year of routines. And I think I recall something called club swinging, which has a different connotation today. But you had actually 2 wooden clubs. Think of 10-pin bowling clubs, and they'd have lights on the end of them, and you'd be performing routines as these would be swinging around, and so on. And the other one is performing gymnastics outside at the rugby grounds and the football grounds as half-time entertainment. I recall the rugby ones was that there's a strong association between the YMCA and the sporting facilities. So every time there was not a break in play, every time there was either a half-time or even pre-match entertainment, the YMCA would take down their equipment, and there'd be groups of youngsters doing, say, like forward rolls, somersaults, back flips, front flips, and then you're doing a whole range of vaults as well, would be thrown in. And of course, everyone was quite watching this, and then suddenly, thank you very much, good day, we'd all run around, pick up the equipment off, and then the match would start. Yeah, it was quite spectacular performing in the Brangwyn Hall with all the wonderful paintings that are there. To be there behind stage and then go out on the stage and realise the place was full of supporters of the YMCA, and obviously parents as well. Yeah, but it was a wonderful memories. No doubt at all, YMCA did have an impact on me. Mainly because of the proudness of the association of what my grandfather had managed to achieve, both in the 28 and 32 Olympics. And also there was 24 Olympics as well. In the 1924 Olympics, there were 4 gymnasts in the Swansea YMCA that were entered into who made it into the Great British team to represent the UK or the Great Britain at the Olympics in 24. So being exceptionally proud of what grandfather has achieved is something I'm very much aware of, and I've managed to pass that legacy down to my children. So as a history, as an association with the YMCA and what it's achieved, as a family, we all recognise the uniqueness of that, what grandfather had achieved within the organisation. It was very emotional walking through the door this morning after 55 years, and I feel home. I feel I'm at home, but equally I feel as if I'm part of the structure, part of what you're on offering. And it'd be nice to actually think after 100 years, have to have that 100-year connection to go from 1919, 1920 to 2020, 2022, that there's still the name Standish somewhere along the line, helping or participating, even if it's only a voluntary role within the organisation, because it'll be there in the archives ready for the next generations to come through. It's a rich family history, but could only have been provided by having the facility of the YMCA